No matter how development is measured, it is always geographically uneven. In this lecture, we will examine key concepts in development such as economic indicators. These topics are important to geography because of the desire to pinpoint and analyze the unevenness from one place or region to another, as well as the social and environmental consequences of development in hopes to understand the differences around the world. Development is the process that brings about changes in economic prosperity and the quality of life. Over the years, different terms have been used to describe the level of development when compared with countries. The terms first, second, and third world were used during the Cold War, when the world was divided by capitalism and communism. It was said that the first world countries were capitalistic and the second world countries were communistic. Third world then meant everyone else who were neutral. These were usually the countries that were generally poorer and less developed than the others. The map at the top shows the three distinct worlds. The first world included the United States, United Kingdom, and their capitalistic allies. The second world contained the Soviet Union, China, and their communistic allies. The third world was then considered neutral or non-aligned countries. Today we normally use the terms developed and developing to distinguish the development differences among countries. The map in the middle shows the developed and developing countries and further divides the categories as advanced economies, in transition, less developed, and least developed. We also use the term global north and global south to distinguish the developing and developed, whereas if you look at the map at the bottom, there is a clear line between the developed north in blue and the developing south in red. Australia is an obvious exception and is considered in the north under this classification. How can we measure countries when there may be different opinions on what development really means? Not everyone shares the same definition on the quality of life. One person might find that not having electricity does not impact their happiness, while someone else would suffer for not having it. The answer to this question is that a normative approach is always used. Normative means to take a standard approach or establishing norms to measure the economic prosperity and quality of life. This approach usually implies that there will be improvement in one or more of the following: a society's economic, social, or environmental conditions. Since development depends on human, financial, and natural resources, there are two perspectives to consider in development. One is conventional development, where economic and social gains are favored, but the impacts of the environment are not considered on these gains. And two, sustainable development, where all three are considered. In other words, sustainable development favors economic and social gains achieved in ways that do not compromise natural resources or the state of the environment for future generations. There are many different economic indicators to gauge development, but the three basic ones are gross national income, gross domestic product, and poverty. Gross national income, or commonly referred to as GNI, is the total monetary value of goods and services produced in a year by a country, whether inside the borders or outside. This is usually expressed per capita, or in other words, per person. The map shows the gross national income per capita for the world. Many development agencies use the specific values shown in the map key to distinguish the most from the least economically developed countries. Note the middle income category is subdivided into upper and lower income groups. Take a look at the anomaly in the Middle East. Why do you think these countries are greater than the rest of the surrounding countries? The second economic indicator is gross domestic product, or commonly referred to as GDP, which is the total monetary value of goods and services produced within a country's geographic borders. Therefore, if there is a business operated in a foreign country, that income would not be counted in the domestic number, but it would count in the host country's GDP. Generally speaking, the GDP is used to gauge a country's wealth, but it does have limitations. One, it only includes the formal economy and not the informal sector. Therefore, developing countries whose people rely heavily on the informal sectors have a skewed number. Secondly, the GDP does not take into consideration the unevenness or unevenness of wealth within the country. And third, the GDP or GNI do not take into consideration the social or environmental costs associated with the consumption of resources used in the production of goods and services. Since different countries have different currency valuations and exchange rates can fluctuate tremendously from day to day, purchase power parity or PPP is used. PPP is equivalent to a global exchange rate usually tied to the US dollar. Therefore, when PPP is used, we can compare apples to apples. These graphs show change in GDP per capita by region and for selected countries. More steeply sloped lines indicate a faster rate of growth or decline. Despite some declines, the graph on the left shows every region has experienced overall growth since 1980, and some regions have grown more rapidly than others. These data are reported in constant 2005 international dollars to show that they have been adjusted to remove distortions caused by inflation, using 2005 as a baseline year. The graph on the right records South Korea's phenomenal economic growth before and after the 1998 Asian financial crisis. It also shows the precipitous decline in Saudi Arabia, triggered by an oil glut in the early 1980s. Bhutan and China have also experienced significant per capita GDP growth. Poverty is the third basic indicator. For development, poverty is defined as insufficient income to purchase the basic necessities of food, clothing, and shelter. The World Bank has established two international poverty lines that distinguish between extreme poverty and moderate poverty. Extreme poverty is living on less than $1.25 per day PPP, and moderate poverty is living on less than $2 per day PPP. Two other terms used when describing poverty is the poverty line. This is the specific income amount used to separate the poor from the non-poor, and the poverty rate, which is percentage of the population living below the poverty line. This map shows the prevalence of extreme poverty by country. The highest percentages occur in Africa and in Haiti. There are several developing countries for which we still lack data. Also, many high-income countries gather and report their poverty data using different poverty lines, so they lack comparable data. Please pause the video and answer the following. Explain the difference between conventional and sustainable development. Also, do you think a country can engage in sustainable development and still compete with other countries who only engage in conventional development? Defend your position. In your own words, using the text as a guide, be thorough and specific with your answer.